Just to give you an idea of how these pieces work together, this is a pretty good idea of a stack that you need to put together to deliver some type of a private cloud experience. And if you look at the cloud stack, our technology, the cloud stack is the name of our product. It's not surprising you can sort of break it into these different pieces. At the end of the day, it's all about kind of leveraging. Sorry, I'll move over this way a bit. Leveraging these different pieces of technology, the storage, the networking, the compute, through an orchestration engine, exposing that up then with some automation and the business logic to say, okay, who can access what resources, when are they allowed to talk to these resources, what kind of limitations do I want to put on them, and then at the end of the day, pushing that up through an API so you can programmatically control it. Now, people will access that maybe through the UI, they might access that through RightScale, they might write directly applications that can talk to that API, but at the end of the day, the system, has to give you that full ability to control these underlying resources, and it's a non-trivial problem. And one of the things you'll find is that, deploying something like this is pretty difficult. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. How do you architect a private cloud? How do you pick, what type of infrastructure to use to deploy it? But, a big part of it is just, what is this thing going to give me? What is my user experience going to be like? And I just thought sometimes it's helpful to see something. So, people that use CloudStack out of the box will set up a couple servers, with VMware or Zen server, put it into a network environment, attach some storage, and set up the management layer, and it looks like this out of the box. You can pick your language, you can sign in, create a couple accounts, and pretty quickly you're into a virtualization management environment where you can control, effectively your networks, your virtual machines, your storage, your networking, your templates, all of the main components that make up environments. Now, a lot of our customers use RightScale to talk to this, so they may never, as a user, you may not ever even see this. You might be making command and calls inside RightScale. It's talking to the API of the cloud stack, and you're not even talking to the VM. But if you're using this as an end user, it has a GUI. You're able to come in and go provision VMs. You can pick from different hypervisors. You can pick from different data centers that you have capacity set up in, and you can provision these VMs. You can access the VM, you get information about it, stop, start, destroy. Same things you can do in EC2. It's the same type of user experience, attaching volumes, taking snapshots, backing up data, being able to manage your volumes all the way down to, clicking on the console, opening it up in a web window and interfacing with your VM directly over your browser. So, the cloud experience now 2, 3, 4 years on is getting pretty good. It's stable, it's reliable, you can set these things up, and if you design your hardware infrastructure right, you can build a very reliable, very robust system on your own hardware in your own data center that can talk to RightScale, that can talk up to that level. And at the same time, though, so many great companies are out there offering these services as on demand, zero risk, deploy on our systems for low cost. But there has to be a good reason to deploy inside the cloud. And I think there's, by and large, most applications are great for public cloud consumption. They run great on Amazon or on any of the great public clouds out there. But there are cases where people want private cloud, and it tends to fall into either they have some very specific performance requirements. They're very big. They need, they need a certain level of capacity. They want to make sure that things are tuned to work well with the applications they have. They have some flexibility issue where they want to leverage the existing resources they have dynamically. So maybe some of that's a little bit about cost, some of that's about integrating with their existing systems and processes. Or there's control issues. You have, some level of a security concern or this data, I don't want to leave my firewall. I don't want this to go out beyond the corporate fringe. So these tend to be the reasons. And, when we get into customers, they really find, that this private cloud isn't always just about, this is what I'm going to use. I'm not going to use the public cloud at all. I'm going to be a private cloud customer. To the contrary, it tends to be that hybrid deployments are actually the most common. People are looking and saying, how do I manage public resources, private resources, and deploy these in a way that meets my business requirements? And Zynga is a great example. One of our customers that's a huge Amazon customer, one of Amazon's largest customers. They built something they call zCloud, which is their private implementation of the cloud stack that's connected to Amazon. And the reason they did it was pretty clear. They have a lot of their games have a pretty reliable known workload, and they felt like they could run those on their own systems very reliably at a cost point that made a lot of sense to them, so they could reduce their costs. And they would allow them to really use the burst capacity on things like Amazon for demand that was variable. So they could, they were happy to pay a premium for that because they didn't have to buy hardware, they wouldn't have to develop, the reliance on these public clouds. So they've been running this now for about 3-4 months now. The first few games have gone live on zCloud, and there are over 1,000 physical servers in this. And what's been great about this is Zynga really worked closely. They've been a RightScale customer for a long time, using RightScale on Amazon. And when they looked inside to decide what they were going to deploy on for their private cloud, it was really important to find a system that would scale, that had the connections to RightScale for so that they knew that experience would bridge both their commercial, enterprise public cloud experience and their private cloud experience as well. So Zynga is a good example of use cases. But interestingly, the size of these private clouds that we work on with customers varies wildly. I mean, Zynga might be thousands of servers. Other companies might be 5, 10, 20 servers where they set up a small environment that they use for dev and test, but most of their deployments are out in the public cloud because they feel like it's more reliable, it has a better operational team than they can even deliver internally. So determining what goes in the public, what goes in the private isn't always easy. And one of the reasons to kind of think about as you're deploying one of these things is what's the right architecture for a private cloud? Why am I building it? What's going to go on it? And if you're going to build a private cloud, you probably want to go through a process, something like this, where you really explicitly define your use cases. I mean, I find this, is an exercise that a lot of people don't do. They sort of just say, I'm going to build a cloud, but I'm not sure what it's going to use it for. I just need VMs, or we're going to use it for lots of different things. It'll be a sandbox we can do things with. It's a really bad way to build a cloud. You want to know what you're going to use it for in general. You want to have especially if you're going to do it in any kind of scale. It's fine to experiment and try things in a small scale, but before putting the effort into going and building something like this, know what it's going to do. Know what the business case is for your business. How is it going to save you money? Otherwise, if there's no good reason to build a private cloud, you should leverage public cloud resources. It's easier. It's less expensive. It gives you all of the advantages of a private cloud without a lot of the cost and time and risk. It's only if you have very specific use cases that you should be looking at building private, using hybrids. But inevitably, lots of people end up coming to the conclusion they do want to build a private cloud of some kind or another. In that case, figure out, based on those use cases, what the requirements are going to be. What do I need my infrastructure to deliver to me? Because only if you figure this out, only if you understand, I'm going to be running this kind of application, it's going to have this level of performance requirements, it's going to have these database requirements, I need to be able to run some of these specific elements, are you going to be able to eventually come up with sort of the technical architecture that says, well, we need to use VMware for this because they have certain features that Zen doesn't offer us, or KVM doesn't offer us, or we need to have some really fast storage, so we want to look at using fiber channel storage from EMC instead of using the local disk on the box, or instead of using some kind of an open source storage platform. So determining your users, these user stories and understanding the actual deployment model will help you figure out then what kind of hardware you need, which is a tough decision. I mean, there's a lot of choices out there, a lot of hardware you can use, but it will have dramatic impact on what you can do. I mean, at the end of the day, you can only squeeze so much, so many horsepower out of your engine, and your engine is really what you choose to build your cloud with. And then finally, once you've gotten this, don't jump in. By and large, don't jump into this full feet, go build a 1,000 server cloud and move all your IT to it. The reality is for hybrid clouds, it's now is the time to start building things, to start trying things, developing pilot environments, putting 1 or 2 applications on it. The cool thing about private clouds is they're very similar to public clouds. They expand really well. You don't get a lot of benefit from having a gigantic private cloud any more so than you get from a small private cloud. So don't feel pressure from some vendor trying to convince you that this is an enterprise-wide project. You should spend $5 million and go convert your company into a cloud. It's ridiculous. Private clouds should be just as expandable, just as elastic as public clouds. They're harder to set up, than a public cloud, which may take 5 minutes with a credit card. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't be trying to, redo your entire ITIL-based architecture around some cloud platform that requires you to lock into something that you're going to be stuck with for a long time. So once, just kind of working through that process, as you're thinking about building your cloud, you're going to have different requirements based on the kind of company you are. If you're a software company or a large enterprise or a bank, you're going to need different things. You're going to have different application workloads. If you're going to use it for sort of software development and different kinds of builds of software, you don't need the same thing as a traditional IT company. So understand what your requirements are. Understand what type of applications you're going to use it for. Understand what kind of internal processes. If you're using it for testing and dev, you probably don't need to have really fantastic IOPS performance and, a lot of really expensive back-end storage. You might just need to have, good local disk, and, it's really about, persistency of your data is not nearly as important than if you're going to be using it for, production applications that have a lot of, databases or some kind of persistent environment. So figure out your use cases, design those use cases right so that you can consume the cloud and build the cloud that is the right cloud, because the price of developing one of these things can vary wildly. I mean, depending on what you choose as your set of required features, the cost of building one of these, if you imagine building this with the HP blade matrices and with the latest EMC-based SAN storage and with VMware and with the latest Cisco Nexus 5K switches, you can sink hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into hardware. You can sink a lot of money into services and integration costs, and if you don't need all that stuff, you're really missing the whole point of this cloud. So it's supposed to be about driving costs out of your business. It's supposed to be about encouraging flexibility. And even if you need some of these things, you might not need it for your entire cloud infrastructure. Clouds should be pretty flexible. You should be able to have different levels of quality. You should be able to choose between QoS levels that are right for your business. So, one of the things we spend a lot of time talking to customers about is, well, what features do you have to have? What features are critical for the applications you're deploying? And I won't go through this list, but I'm happy to share the presentation with anybody who'd like it afterwards. But, depending on what your requirements are, if your VM needs to have fault tolerance on it, then you probably need to look at VMware, because Zen Server doesn't have that. If you have incredible IOPS performance issues, you need to think about what kind of storage you're going to put it on, because, standard iSCSI is probably not going to do a very good job, but, local disk or fiber channel will give you exactly what you need. So picking the right, the exact requirements you need, what kind of experience you're going for, will help you figure out which is the right orchestration platform, which is the right hardware, which is the right networking architecture, whether you use gigabit or 10G networks, and all of these things are important, because if you make certain choices, they're going to limit what works well in the environment, but you might also be able to save a lot of money and deliver something that meets all of your needs. So once you've determined that, then you can take those workload and performance requirements and go through and actually pick the type of infrastructure you want to deploy on. And that means selecting the hypervisor or multiple hypervisors that you're going to use in the cloud. Today in the enterprise world, VMware is still 80% of enterprise virtualization. In the cloud world, Zen Server is 95% of virtualization running on Amazon and RightScale and Rackspace and Tata and all these companies. So, you have sort of two competing options, and there's good reason for both of these things, right? And VMware is incredibly stable. It's a Lexus product. It's got so many great features that enterprise admins love it. It's reliable. It stays up. Zen is cheap or free depending on which version you buy. It's gotten quite reliable. Amazon uses it, and a lot of other people use it because it allows you to deliver a great experience at a very low price point. You're not going to get a whole. It's more of maybe a Honda to a Lexus is some way to think of it, right? It's reliable, but it doesn't have all the features you might see in something like VMware. In a cloud, if you know what's important there, you can determine whether you need to invest in something like a VMware-based cloud. It's going to be quite expensive compared to deploying on Zen Server or KVM. HyperV is still getting there when it comes to using it in the cloud. It's still some of the new features that are coming with the new system centers are making it possible for HyperV to deliver the sort of storage motion and the compute motion that you need in a cloud to really operate one effectively. So HyperV is still a tough platform to choose to build a cloud on, but it's definitely getting there, and it's certainly maturing quite quickly. On top of that, sort of making the choice of which hypervisors you're going to support for your end users, you need to decide how you're going to architect your network, and this is, without any question, the hardest part of building a cloud. Networking in the cloud is very complex. Multi-tenant networking is always complex, but automating multi-tenant networking is very difficult, because there's a lot of existing technologies like VLANs and and MPLS and things that allow me to assign users and assign different people isolated network segments, but they don't always scale that well. They have limitations. They can only get so big. Assigning them dynamically is sometimes difficult. So there's people who will swear that the right way to do networking in the cloud is based on VLANs and giving each user their own or multiple VLANs for each sort of virtual environment, whereas other people really love the Amazon approach. Everything is on flat networks, everything gets direct IP addresses, things like security groups and elastic IP and elastic load balancing policies allow us to sort of take a lot of those same traditional enterprise concepts and deliver them in a way that's different. again, if your company has an existing policy and has a lot of concepts of the right way to do these things, it's probably not going to be easy to shift them, especially if you're bringing workloads in here. So determining what is going to work well with your culture, that your IT guys can handle, and meets your workload requirements is going to be important. And you might be able to, maybe the answer is you need to do a little bit of both. I mean, we are seeing companies today saying, for certain types of applications, this style of networking is really what's important, but for our, web front ends on things, we want highly scalable, highly distributed environments. Finally, the storage layer is the other bit that just spends, really ties people up in knots as they're trying to decide how to build a cloud. Because, again, it's an area where you can really range in investment from almost nothing, literally using the disks on your servers as local storage, all the way up to, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in SAN investments with vendors like EMC. And, they're both perfectly justified for different use cases, but determining if you want to use an iSCSI platform, an NFS-based storage platform, fiber channel storage, local disk, or even cloud storage with things like, like S3 and some of the technology that's turning those into object or block storage devices, you're going to spend a lot of time understanding what you need to do, figuring out the right types of storage architectures, and you're not going to have a good sense of what to do unless you really understand the use cases you're going after. Because there's great options at every price point. There's emerging technologies like Gluster. There's really great companies like Nexenta that we see people building clouds on commodity hardware and doing a great job with. But picking the right one, understanding what you're doing, it's not always easy. There's definitely trade-offs if you choose to go one direction or another, and we see people struggle with this pretty consistently. So eventually, once you've got this all set up, a cloud, it's hard to say what is a cloud. How big does it be? If it's just a virtualization cluster, is it a cloud? How big does it have to be to call it some kind of a private cloud? I don't think size has anything to do with it. It really has to do with how you manage that infrastructure. If you can provision and control that infrastructure automatically through an API in a multi-tenant type of environment where users are isolated, you probably have a cloud today. It's really then tying these things together. So a lot of our customers, they'll start with a single pod, a single rack of servers, running maybe one or two clusters of VMware and Zen server, and that's a good start. If it's got the management server on top of that, it's connected to RightScale, you can really start at that scale. More often, these will scale out and become large-scale availability zones. So any given data center in your environment can become one of these availability zones, and all of them can connect up to a centralized management server layer where you run the policy, you define what people in your organization can do in this environment. What are the limits? What does a person need to get special permission to go above? What kinds of VMs can they create? What templates are available for them? What is it that they can do in this cloud? But the power of the cloud is really in this. It's this centralized management server and orchestration layer that's managing resources that are distributed globally against centralized policy that allows for multi-tenancy and people deploying different types of applications in different times. So this is a very traditional architecture. We see people deploy this a lot. And once they've got this up, it tends to look something like this. You'll set up a zone or two in your different data centers. You'll configure and set up a management server, and your admins will be responsible for that. And this is not a small undertaking. I mean, if you heard what we've talked about, selecting the right infrastructure, working with your network team to define the right network policy, working with your security group to make sure you're meeting the security requirements. None of this is trivial. But once you have this in place, you can extend it by adding hosted private cloud zones, and these are zones where a service provider would say to you, look, if you need additional capacity, we'll dedicate capacity to you. So companies like DataPipe and LogicWorks and others will offer you, the ability to set up a rack or 2 racks or 3 racks in their data center that are dedicated to you and part of your hybrid cloud. They're sort of a hosted, private, on-demand element that you can get access to. On top of that, you'll have, then a connection to RightScale if you have a relationship with RightScale, and this management server can be controlled by RightScale. And more than likely, then your users will come in through RightScale, they'll manage that, and then from there, they'll be able to connect this all up to the centralized, public clouds, whether that's Amazon or Tata or Rackspace or whomever is your vendor of choice from a public cloud perspective. So this is kind of what we see happening in larger enterprises, people that are really taking to deploying private clouds. It looks a lot like this, or some combination of these features. But these are basically the building blocks. Lots of, physical servers, hypervisors, networking storage, deployed internally, deployed externally, and then federated and managed across multiple systems. So, the challenge with all of that we came up with, over the last year and working with RightScale was, as useful and as proven as this is, it is relatively complex. It takes a lot of time. It's difficult for people to set this up. It's really a traditional enterprise project. You're going to invest some time and people and resources in making it happen. And, over the last 3 years, there's been such an interest in cloud that we find people constantly trying to find out, how can I do this easier? How can I set something up quickly? How do I just start trying this in my environment before I move forward? And so we just this weekend, or just during this conference, we've introduced this new technology called MyCloud. And MyCloud is an on-ramp to the cloud and an on-ramp to the hybrid cloud that's really gone and tried to make it as simple and easy as possible for enterprises and even small businesses to take existing resources that they have and start managing them through RightScale, through the cloud. So there's a couple key differences between this and the architecture I just showed you. In this environment, we're moving the management tier, the orchestration layer, into the cloud as a service. And so we're taking away the requirement for you to establish and run a cloud and orchestrate an architected cloud, and rather all you need to bring as the local internal service provider, so to speak, is your own infrastructure. So any servers you have, you'll bring those servers, and you can set them up, configure them to connect to this centralized management server layer, and have these services running inside of RightScale in less than 30 minutes. So this is something we spent a lot of engineering effort with, both on the RightScale and Cloud.com side, and it's really a neat process. You get started very easily. Go to this site is launching, I think, next week, but you'll go to rightscale.com/mycloud or cloud.com/mycloud, and you can register to create your MyCloud. You give it username, set up your password, and within a couple minutes you'll get a token generated that will be sort of your unique identifier. It allows you to tag all of your servers you're going to add to this cloud as private, belonging to you, and so that you can find them in the ether and no one else can. Once you have this, you're going to take your bare metal machine, whatever it is, and install Ubuntu 10.4 on it, because we're going to be leveraging the KVM hypervisor that's part of that Linux deployment natively. So in this install, you'll install Ubuntu. Once you've got that set up, you'll download the installer agent. So you just point your Ubuntu system up in the cloud. It'll pull down the MyCloud agent. Well, once it's done that, you'll expand it, unpack the installer, unpack the agent, and within a few minutes, the agent's then ready to install. Sort of have your choice of, install the agent or move on. This whole process probably takes 5 minutes at the most, but once you've gone in and asked to install the agent, the system will go through its normal steps, and you'll get a word back in a couple minutes that the agent's been installed, the system is ready to be configured, and you'll be able to do some final configurations. It'll check to make sure that your network is configured correctly, that the hypervisor is working correctly, that it's got a connection to the MyCloud and has registered itself, and that it's added your VM into your own private little availability zone running inside of your organization. These systems then will show up when you log into your MyCloud account. You'll see that you've successfully registered your server. It's now available. And if you click on you can see it there, my Compute One resource. But if I click on the little agent there, I'll be able to add that to my RightScale account. Then when I'm in RightScale, I'll immediately see, when I click on the Clouds tab in RightScale, I'll be able to see among AWS and among all these different options, I'll have MyCloud. And my cloud deployment will be exposed to me as instances that I can start to manage. And all that capacity on those servers, however much capacity is there, I'll be able to go in, provision, and run myself. So if I go in, I can start creating resources. I can choose from small, medium, large, extra large instances. And as long as I have capacity on these servers that I've set up in MyCloud, I'll be able to to run all of this. I'll be able to configure security groups, and I'll be able to deploy RightScale images and templates directly onto the server, sitting on my desk or sitting in my lab, just as if it was sitting in Amazon. So the ability to do all this very quickly. You'll be losing the local disk on the machine. You'll be using relatively straightforward approach to consuming resources that you brought to the party and this whole thing doesn't cost you anything. You can add more nodes to it. You can if you want to go with 10 nodes, 50 nodes, 5,000 nodes, there's no limit on the size your MyCloud can be. They can be in different locations. They can be really wherever you want to put them. And these clouds will become individual resources will manage the total available capacity, and you'll be able to see how much capacity you have. I have, 20 gigs of RAM available, and 8 sockets, and 40 cores, and this much CPU available for me to provision with. So I'll be able to use that capacity whenever I want to inside my environment. And like I was saying, best of all, the basic edition is free. Everything we've talked about and shown here doesn't cost anything. You can set it up yourself and be up and running with your own private cloud, connected to RightScale with all of that power for in 30 minutes. And what makes it so nice is you can deploy all of your standard EC2 like instance types. It's running KVM, so you'll be using QCOW images, which is the KVM native format. You can use the local disk. You'll be able to use sort of traditional Amazon-like flat networking, and as long as you're not running sort of public applications where you need to have, elastic IPs and elastic load balancing, the basic edition is probably going to be great. It's perfect for things like dev and test and running internal testing and pilots and anything you might want to run inside your environment and share with people in the local environment where it's available. We're also going to offer a standard edition, which will come out a little bit later this year, which will allow you to add some additional features like EBS, like more NAS integration, public IP addresses for running public services. If you want to run and host your own systems out to the public internet, you'll be able to do that with the standard edition, and it will add a lot of the RightScale advanced features as well. So you'll move up to sort of an enterprise commercial grade of RightScale as well. So the basic edition is like the developer free edition in RightScale, whereas the standard edition is a more commercialized version. It has support and a number of other pieces. Finally, if you need more complexity, you want to move to something with multiple hypervisors, a much more complex architecture that really can support very large-scale deployments like we were talking about with Zynga and other things. The Enterprise Edition is really there today as well. You can deploy this today. We have dozens of companies running their own private clouds without using the centralized management server layer, but that's sort of the alternate choice. So this is launching in a couple weeks. The Basic Edition, the Enterprise Edition is available now, and the Standard Edition is coming out a little bit later this year. So a lot of this stuff is available now, and what makes it so great is setting up a cloud now can be as easy as just getting your hands on a piece of hardware. You can start to get the experience of what would I use this stuff for? What would the value be in running applications that can be provisioned in 2 minutes on any piece of hardware? So to get started, you can go to cloud.com/product/MyCloud, or it's on our homepage of either cloud.com or RightScale. You can find information about MyCloud. Easier still, you can go directly to your RightScale representative. If you have a RightScale account manager, they can work with you to get access to the system, to get into the early trials, and if you want a beta account, you can probably get that in the next week or so. So this stuff is all available now, and hopefully I've answered a little bit of your questions about how to build a private cloud. You really have lots of choices, from the very, very simple and very easy all the way through complex deployments with multiple hypervisors and very, very complex network and storage architectures.